But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. John 4:14. In Rwanda, in Central Africa, a small spring rises from the ground. Let us follow an imaginary cup of that water. It flows east into Lake Victoria, where it is joined by water from numerous other such springs. It exits Lake Victoria as the White Nile, traveling 2,300 miles north to Khartoum, where it meets the Blue Nile. Together they form the Nile River, which drains 1.3 million square miles, about 4 times the size of Texas, on its way north to the Mediterranean Sea. All in all, this water makes a journey of about 4,130 miles before it arrives at the sea that is literally considered in ancient Greek and Roman culture to be the center of the inhabitable world. Thus does a trickle of water rising up in no particularly remarkable place, the spot in Rwanda, not Rwanda itself, which is quite remarkable, travel a great distance equal to a round-trip drive from New York City to Los Angeles on the way to becoming part of a mighty river that supports over 250 million people before joining the most famous sea in the world. There are multiple aspects of the incredible journey of that water that I want to highlight as analogies for the work of the teacher, specifically in light of what Jesus said to the woman in the well about water welling up to eternal life. First, the humility of its origin. Second, the great distance it has to travel. Third, the company it keeps on its journey. Fourth, the fertility it brings. Fifth, its telos. And sixth, the ground of its inexhaustibility. And I want to start with the humility of its origin. I think you know this, but it's worth reiterating. There are only 2 types of things in existence. There's God, and there's everything else. Only God doesn't come from anything because God doesn't come. He always is. Everything else comes from something. And ultimately, all created things come from nothing. That is to say, God simply makes something exist. Not by working what's already there, but by a total and radical act of newness that causes there to be something where before there was nothing. This is therefore determinative and constitutive of created being, that the trajectory of its existence is from less to more. Now, we might doubt this in a world of entropy, which is itself but the physical expression of the spiritual curse of death that fell upon all of material creation at man's disobedience. But the doctrine of the resurrection, combined with the revealed truth that there will be a new heavens and a new earth, proclaims that the entropic death that awaits creatures is but a stage on their way to a new form of life. Only that which is irredeemable because it wills not to be redeemed is destined for eternal loss. Sin is the reversal of the natural trajectory of the creature. In non-organic beings, this drive towards more is expressed as increase, as when the spring becomes the mighty Nile. In organic beings, it is expressed as growth. The difference between increase and growth is that increase occurs by the addition of something from outside that remains external. The waters of the White and Blue Nile are mingled, but they don't interpenetrate metaphysically. But growth occurs by the addition of something internal, by the converting of the external into the internal. The food the cat eats becomes the cat. In sensate beings, this trajectory towards more is expressed as new experience. In sentient beings, it is expressed as learning. New experience is the encounter of the sensorium with new external stimuli. Learning is the processing of this information into an understanding of some aspect of reality. We all begin knowing almost nothing and are on a journey to knowing more. A journey that has no end because it extends beyond the borders of death. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Therefore, the wise student knows that she knows nothing in the beginning. This is true in the beginning of all life, but also in the beginning of any study. I've done a bit of learning in my time and become an expert in a few areas. But if I wish to enter upon the study of cricket or basket weaving, I will progress much more quickly if I accept up front that I know nothing and set about learning the principles of these new disciplines. Yes, analogies will arise in connections to other areas of my knowledge, but I cannot know in advance where these connections will form. And so it is best to give myself to the study at hand and not presume to know much just because I know about different matters. And so I think we need to keep in mind that our students are starting from nothing, and remember what it was like for us to start from nothing. Part of the task of the teacher is to guide the student in those first steps from nothing in the direction of something. But implicit in this example that I've chosen is the truth that where one begins not only does not determine where one will end, but is not even necessarily a good indicator of where one will end. Any number of springs rise up from the earth and do not become the mighty Nile nor join the Mediterranean River. A great number of them, perhaps most of them, peter out and in the end come to nothing. One cannot know just from the sight of the spring whether it will end 1,000 feet or 1,000 miles away, whether its destiny is to sink back into the earth or to join the mightiest of all seas. Now, secondly, I want to think about the great distance this water has to travel. My earliest memory of reading is trying to pronounce the word pedestrian. I simply couldn't work it out. I remember that we were sitting in the car, for some reason parked near a sign that said pedestrian crossing. I stared and stared, but I couldn't get the word to resolve itself into anything that sounded like a plausible word. I asked my parents for help, and they very unhelpfully replied, "Sound it out." I replied, "I've been trying, I can't." I've come a long way since then. Struggles with the arcane and sometimes senseless spelling rules of English, hundreds of thousands of pages of contemporary and archaic English prose, and the arduous and many-year study of 11 foreign languages have brought me to a point of literacy envied even by the very educated. But when you look at me and see someone who can work in 12 languages, you are only looking at the result. It's like first encountering the Nile at its widest point, ignorant of all that had to happen for all that water to arrive in that place. What is clear to me but opaque to you are all the long hours of arduous study, of confusion, of error, of shame and embarrassment, of insecurity, of frustration. They are not irrelevant to the place that I have arrived at when I turn to speak French. All of my previous failures in speaking French are part of my present French utterance. My entire sense of what to say and what not to say in French has been shaped as much by my failures in speaking French as by my successes. And this is the truth of distance, that it is never abridged, it is never abrogated, it is never short-circuited. The length of the Nile is the length of the Nile. We may devise new and ever more clever ways of traversing that distance, but the distance is a fundamental given in a world of physicality such as we inhabit. Now, I will offer a brief word of apology here to Madeleine L'Engle and her tesseract and all the science of wormholes, which are humanity's great dream for a way to escape the hard truth of distance. Fascinating and interesting as these things may be, they are at present nothing more than a fantasy. We likewise dream of conquering biological death, but we are no closer to doing so simply for being able to conceive that it ought to be possible. So it is this physical inescapability of distance that makes it such a good analogy for the process of learning. When people learn about my linguistics accomplishments, they often ask me, "How did you learn so many languages?" My answer is always the same: with great difficulty. They seem to think that if I have learned so many languages, I must have figured out some sort of secret method for acquiring them, and they want to know if it could work for them as well. The reality is that I have learned no method for mastering a language other than to devote thousands of hours to it. Indeed, this is necessary, because when speaking a language, one speaks out of one's experience of that language. And there's no way to gain experience other than by having experiences. And experiences take time. Well, what is true of language is true of all learning. Lazy students and bad teachers wish to go straight from knowing nothing to knowing everything. This is a fundamental misconception of what it means to know something. It is to mistake the end result of knowledge for knowledge itself. Knowledge is not simply what one attains at the end of a journey, as Athens is the place one arrives at when finishing the road from Sparta to Athens. Rather, knowledge is that which one has as a result of having been on the journey. The journey is not one thing and knowledge another thing. They are one thing. It is like the mighty Nile, which is not distinct from all of the many waters that have poured into it from innumerable tributaries across Africa. Rather, the Nile is their sum, and they are it. To try to have the Nile without its tributaries would be like trying to have love without devotion. To try to have knowledge without learning is like trying to have joy without holiness. Thus, in Latin, one key verb for knowing means to have learned. Or as Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, acquired knowledge cannot be divorced from the existence in which it is acquired. Therefore, good pedagogy, good lesson planning, good teaching in all of its forms seeks not so much to short-circuit the journey as to facilitate it. There is no remedy for the 4,100 miles the students must travel if they are to reach the goal. But there is great propriety and usefulness in understanding the nature of the terrain through which one must go, and in keeping in mind that though the journey seems interminable, it is simply incredibly long. Thirdly, the company this water keeps on its journey. I mentioned earlier that the water from our selected spring does not become the waters of the other rivers, it is only joined by them and mingles with them. Theoretically, it would be possible by very careful and difficult scientific analysis to separate where the various waters came from. So we are to imagine our cupful of water making its way to the Mediterranean Sea in the company of innumerable other cupfuls of water, each with their own past and story, and each together making up the one reality that we call the Nile. In this way also, the journey of learning is one that no one takes alone. It is impossible to take it alone, because knowledge as we know it is a human reality. I could not study anything that has ever been known without having a language of which I am not the author with which to study it. And therefore I study it in the company of those who shaped this language for me. But even the thing itself, which is to be known, is something which has been known by some human and therefore passed on. Any new realizations about the world I have, of which I am truly the first human author, nevertheless depend upon many things that I know, have learned, about the world, things that I am in no sense the author of. Only Adam, who inherits no previous human experience, and who is the crafter of the first human language, may be said to have learned in isolation. But even this is not true, for he had Eve, and before Eve, if there was any learning to be done, it was done in the company of God and the angels. This means, by the way, that all human knowledge is derived from and dependent upon divine knowledge. I imagine it's the same with angelic knowledge. There's simply no knowing without reference to and dependence upon the first knower whose knowledge established all things in their being. Okay, well, if it's impossible to go on this journey alone, then it becomes very important to be thoughtful about with whom you are taking the journey. For not all fellow travelers are equally trustworthy or equally helpful. I should very much like to journey with C.S. Lewis or Thomas Aquinas. I'll doubt very much I should want to journey with Nietzsche or Hemingway. Some of this is preference. Hemingway is a great writer whom I do not generally enjoy reading. But some of this is about the way that they see the world, and the way that they would, if they could, teach me to see the world. I don't want to see the world the way that Nietzsche does. And I don't want his skewed vision distorting my own. This does not mean that I cannot or should not read Nietzsche, but it definitely informs the way that I read Nietzsche. On the journey of learning, students will be accompanied by other students like themselves who need to take that same journey, like our water being joined by water of all the other tributaries. This is the part we and they cannot control. It is left to divine providence to put together classes, to ordain that this group of immortals shall travel the road together rather than some other group. But they will also travel this journey in the company of those who have made the journey before. Those who are familiar with the terrain to be crossed, who know the dangers and the twists and turns, who know the obligations and responsibilities in terms of the many lands that must be irrigated, and that therefore control the specific course of the journey that is to be taken. And that is our role as teachers. We are not just other water in the stream with the students, although we are that, because we ourselves must never stop learning. We also guide the course of the river, making sure that it goes where it should and does not go where it shouldn't. One of the things incumbent upon us is to be made into people who will be good companions for this new generation of humans going on this journey. For as anyone who has traveled with another can tell you, the company you take with you on the journey more than anything else influences the quality of the journey.